Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the impact of COVID-19 on girls' education, pitfalls and potential, convened by the Global Partnership for Education. I'm Erin Ganju, the Managing Director for Echidna Giving, one of the key private funders for girls' education globally. And I'm very happy today to be joined by a wonderful panel of thought leaders in gender equality and education. We have joining us today, Dr. Padmini Murthy, Professor of Global Health, Director of New York Medical College. We have Nnorom, the Deputy Director for Gender of the Federal Ministry of Education of Nigeria. We have Anne-Birgitte Albrectsen, the CEO of Plan International. And we have Alice Albright, the CEO of the Global Partnership for Education. Together, we will tackle this difficult subject of the impact of the pandemic on girls and their educational opportunities. As many of us are aware, as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, it has estimated based on past crises we have experienced that somewhere near 20 million secondary school age girls may never return to school. The current risks for girls, as we all know and are seeing and experiencing in our own communities, are several, ranging from learning loss, especially given the fewer distance learning opportunities for girls, often while out of school, as they have less likely to have access to technology. We've seen an increase in child marriage and teen pregnancy. Present hardships and trauma also include physical and sexual abuse, food and economic insecurities, and all of these risks can lead to a permanent school dropout. So that is a stark reality of what girls are facing in this time of crisis. And before we start our panel, we have a recorded message to share with you from Mr. James Cleverly, the Minister of State for the Middle East and North Africa in the UK. So we'll start with our video.
I am delighted to have been invited to speak to you at this landmark event as we mark 1 year to the Rewired Summit in December 2021. COVID-19 has been the largest disruptor of education ever. At the peak of school closures, 1.6 billion students were out of education. Millions of children and young people in the most vulnerable places in the world never returned to education. Girls are more likely to suffer than most. COVID-19 has compounded an already desperate education situation. Even before it hit, 258 million children were out of school, half of them girls, and 9 out of 10 children in low-income countries could not read a simple text by the age of 10. COVID-19 is not just a global health crisis nor an economic crisis, it's an education crisis too. And without urgent action, the scars will be felt for generations to come. Millions of female potential future doctors, teachers, entrepreneurs, scientists, engineers will not get there, will not break the cycle of poverty. This would be a tragic waste and an injustice that must be averted. Otherwise, there'll be a long-term damage to individuals, communities, and nations. The challenges are great, and yet so are the opportunities. Empowering girls through education is a game changer. If, as a global community, we succeed in giving every girl 12 years of quality education, economies will grow, poverty will fall, lives will be saved, the fight against climate change will be emboldened, and we will stand the best chance of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The UK has long been committed to girls' education. For example, since 2015, we have helped more than 8 million girls get a decent education. And in the context of COVID-19, we have adjusted our UK aid programme and worked through organisations like the Global Partnership for Education to provide support at this critical time. But given the scale and the depth of this crisis at hand, we must go further and we must go faster. 2021 offers a series of major moments to secure global commitments to improve girls' access to quality education. Throughout the UK, we will be at the fore. We will kickstart the year by using our G7 presidency to rally the international community to get behind 12 years of quality education. And we will co-host the Kenya Global Partnership for Education Replenishment Summit. These two incredibly important opportunities to push the international community to step up for girls. Another key moment, of course, will be the Rewired Summit itself, where the UK looks forward to joining our partners, the UAE and many others, in championing the rights of every girl to a quality education and securing political will from governments around the world. Let me end by extending my sincere thanks to today's hosts. Let us continue to work together to protect the rights of everyone to reach their full potential.
So Padmini, Keme, AB, and Alice, thank you so much for joining us today for this important conversation. Padmini, I will ask you the first question as we navigate through this together. There are always, as we've said, millions of girls at risk of never setting foot back into a classroom. What do you know about the key barriers hindering girls to go back to the school and key challenges that they may face while being out of school at this time?
Thank you so much, Erin. Greetings from New York to everybody. And before I answer your question, I would like to express my sincere appreciation. It's an honor to be on this panel with all the esteemed panelists, and kudos to everybody who's working to promote education. Now, you asked me this question. I'm just going to put on my physician's hat for a minute, being a physician educator. One of the biggest challenges I see, ladies, gentlemen, and honored guests, is the increasing incidence and prevalence of gender-based violence, which has become even more because girls and women are in closed spaces. So often they are not allowed to go, not only because of the quarantine and the effects, but you know what? The girl has to do the work at home. This is also led, as we know, there have been reports, and one of the NGOs I'm involved with, the American Medical Women's Association, we work closely, in Africa, Nepal, India, and other countries. We have found that these girls are being forced into marriage, early marriage. So what happens is early marriage, pregnancy, because uh, there's no access to contraception. That's another barrier. You have teenage mothers who are pulled out of school. So it's really a vicious cycle. So as the Honorable Minister who just so eloquently expressed, it is just not a health crisis, it's an education, it's a social crisis, Erin. So this is a three-dimensional challenge we are facing. The other challenge we face is that a lot of these girls are doing extra work. They are being subjected to violence even outside the home because they still have to go to get water. So this is, again, it's all interconnected. And the fear, there's a lot of misinformation we know which is out there. And the UN, as all of us know, has been launching and has been messaging about the importance of not giving false information. As a physician trained, and so many of us, we say, if you can't help, do no harm. Unfortunately, we need to think before we share information. So the challenges are misinformation, violence against girls, lack of nutrition. That's another big challenge we are facing. And as we know, because of the gender disparities and gender norms, like the girls and women are at the bottom of the rung. So when there is limited access to food, they are not getting the right nutrition. And if a young teenage girl out of school, forced into marriage, is pregnant, increased incidence of maternal mortality, morbidity, infant mortality, and morbidity. So to sum up, without going over time, I just want to tell you, these are the challenges and they are multi-fold. And the last thing I just want to talk about is the lack of immunization. We have a vaccine which was just approved, and it happened. It couldn't have happened on a more historic day. That is the Universal Health Coverage Day. But again, we need to make sure there is equality and equity in this distribution. So not only COVID, so this is another great, grave challenge I see that we are, moving forward. And the lack of personal protective equipment has been a major challenge. And before I hand it over, one of the things we have worked is to get 80,000 masks working with NGOs to the Navajo Nation here in the United States. And a lot of women and girls did not have access to PPE. So you go back, you don't have soap, you don't have PPE. So I hope I've answered your question, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Padmini. That was very articulate in the many challenges that girls and women are facing that we're deeply concerned about. Keme and AB, it would be great to also dig a little bit deeper into some of the national level experiences as well from Nigeria and other parts of the world. What measures are countries that you're seeing are putting into place in terms of tracking out-of-school girls, looking at re-enrollment when schools start to reopen, and gathering gender-responsive data? Keme, I'll hand it over to you first.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. I'm sorry my voice is a bit husky because I have a cold, but I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you know, we have issues with out-of-school girls in Nigeria, but basically there are a lot of methods and mechanisms put in place by Nigeria, my government, to ensure that these children are tracked. First, there is a body called the National Education Management Information System. The body tracks out-of-school children in basic education, that is the pre-primary, the primary, and junior secondary. Then you also have the nomadic by being tracked by NNEC. Then you have the tertiary, the one that is also responsible for tracking data at the tertiary level. Apart from these systems put in place to track them, we also have data that we get from attendance register in school, which makes up the annual school census, which is conducted every year. We take the attendance register, the admissions register, the graduation report to show whether those who were admitted from the beginning actually graduated. With that, you are able to collate those who dropped out along the way. And then we have a collaboration with the communities using some mechanism which we call the high-level women advocates. We also use the traditional leaders in the community who ensures and know the children who are not in school in the communities. And with this, we are able to track them. In terms of re-enrollment of girls to school, we have the national framework on enrollment drive. Every year, immediately before school resumes, and immediately it has taken off, we engage the communities to do massive enrollment drive to ensure that children who are not in school are re-enrolled in school. We also use community mechanism, engage the traditional leaders, because most times the community leaders are listened to adheredly by the people. So we use that mechanism of the traditional leaders to ensure that these children, especially the girls, are brought back to school. And then of recent, my ministry decided to go a step further, and that is to do identification of children who are really out of school in various communities. This they did through the State Ministry of Education, CSOs, and the high-level women advocates as well. They went out to the grassroots, identified a lot of children who are not in school, enrolled them directly into school, and gave them supplies, school supplies, to ensure that most of the factors hindering them from going to school are surmounted. And then there was even a cash transfer to their mothers so that their mothers could trade and be able to pay, offset some bills to make sure these children go to school. So this financial support, we think, will go a long way towards ensuring that these children remain in school. And there are a lot of things. There is to make sure there is disaggregated data, knowing that our children, the statistic tilts towards the girls. We ensured that the children that are brought to school are 60% girls and 40% boys. And this we intend to scale up so that every out-of-school girl is brought back to school. I think that's some of the things we have done in my country, Nigeria.
Thank you so much. That is inspiring to see, to think of every a girl making it back. AV, would you like to add some country experience as well to that?
Oh, thank you so much. And it was really lovely to hear from Nigeria. But just before I start, let me just add my thanks to the Rewired team and Expo 2020, and of course our long-term partners in girls' education, Dubai Cares, and indeed GPE, that's also with us today. Obviously, governments around the world are focusing largely on making sure that they're protecting the health and safety of all learners and all teachers as they all go back to school. And we're also seeing a considerable investment in learning outside the school environment with all the different circumstances that are there. But as we just heard from Nigeria, a lot of measures are being put in place, and some perhaps not. And I'd just like to call out a few things that we really need every government to be focusing on. And that's, of course, first and foremost, that even as education has continued outside the physical school environment, and as was mentioned earlier as well, the digital gender gap is making it incredibly difficult for girls to continue their education. There are, and not just girls, because there are over 200 million students that don't have a computer at home, and about 700 million that lack internet access. So huge disparities that need to be addressed really, really urgently. As we also heard, girls face so many barriers to go to school under normal circumstances. And as the massive effort is done by many governments to encourage girls to re-enroll in school, there's got to be a real specific gender focus on removing those barriers. So it includes removing policies that discriminate against girls, including bans on re-entry for pregnant girls and young mothers, providing flexible and accelerated learning opportunities, as well as catch-up courses, removal of school fees or the types of cash support that was just mentioned, and really making sure that the specific barriers girls face are responded to. We also need to make sure that the education response plans themselves are truly gender responsive, and that any data collected on supporting those plans are gender and age disaggregated, so we can look at that. A few other things just briefly. We've got to make sure that we already now, and as girls and boys go back to school, that we're prioritizing resilience building. This is not going to be the last shock that will happen to education in the next decade. Whether it's pandemic related, or whether it's climate change related, or other disasters, we've got to really build resilience in all communities to make sure that education can continue no matter what. Of course, big thing, we need to make sure that education budgets are protected. We have countries across the world that are seeing the impact of COVID-19 in a financial sense. So education and finance ministers really need to make sure that they continue to support education through budgets, ideally reaching the minimum global agreed benchmark of 20%. And then, of course, finally, just as Plan International did in Indonesia recently, we put girls and the Ministry of Education together to actually have conversations about what works and what doesn't work. And that meant that the Indonesian government massively changed their approach to distance learning, because they began to hear the lived realities of girls and what needed to change. So thank you, Erin. Back to you.
That's great, AB. Thank you for those. A wonderful focus on a lot of the solutions to removing some of those barriers that we're seeing are impacting girls, and hearing their voices, which is such an important part of this as well in this conversation. On to our next question, both for Alice and again for you, AB. It would be great to stay on that theme of some of the things that can be transformative. In every crisis, there are opportunities, hopefully, for transformation and promising shifts that we are perhaps seeing that can take shape in the global development areas that can accelerate progress on girls' education as well. What do we already know from global efforts to respond to the pandemic and its impact on girls' education that may be moving us in some of those transformative ways? Alice, would you like to join us first and comment?
Sure, thank you. And let me just again do sort of a little quick tech check to make sure you can, you all can hear
great.
me.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, let me also thank everybody at Rewired for putting on this whole event over the last couple of days. I think it's really been an excellent set of conversations. It's also wonderful to be here with all of you, my dear friends and colleagues, talking about a topic that we all know is absolutely vital to the development agenda going forward. So we do know that there has been some progress. Even before the pandemic, we know within our own work, for example, as a partnership, that 82 million more girls are in school in GPE partner countries since the early 2000s. We do know that primary enrollment for girls has increased by some 65%. And we do know that almost 3/4 of partner countries have achieved gender parity in some way in school completion rates. So those are good statistics and good progress. But what we also know is that COVID has posed significant risks to those areas of progress. And as Padmini was saying earlier, there are significant risks from the pandemic that have the potential to roll back much of this. And the impacts could be devastating. And we know that as many as 24 million girls may never go back to school. We know that the incidence of gender-based violence is going up. Teenage pregnancy is going up. So we are really at a risk moment for the progress that we have seen around gender. In terms of your specific question about how do we think about this going forward, the lesson that we've sort of taken on board at GPE is that we can't have gender be sort of a side strategy. It has to be a core strategy and something that is in the middle of our work, and that's very much how we're thinking about it. We started out some years ago with a gender equity strategy. We then started looking at it and said, okay, not good enough. And it was gender equity and slightly off to the side. We then said, okay, and we just approved our strategic plan last week, so we're very excited about that. But we then said, okay, not good enough. We need to go further. So we went from gender equity to gender equality. And AB knows and others that we made a big stink about going from equity to equality because of what the differences are between looking at equity and looking at equality as a goal. So that was one check, is make the strategy about equality. We then thought about, okay, we've got to hardwire gender throughout all of our work and make it a core part of our work and not a side part of our work. So we have a term in our new strategy called hardwiring gender throughout all of it. This means at the policy implementation level, at the monitoring and evaluation level, at how we do our work, at the policy dialogue, at the financing level. It runs all the way through our work in the middle of our work. And then as a third thing that we did, we set up a specific window within our funding capabilities, up to $250 million. It is a gender window with a specific focus on girls' education that will enable donors to target their funding towards gender and specifically girls' education. And then that money will be used to provide additional incentives to countries to top up and even put more muscle towards their work around gender. So over the years that we've been looking at this, we've gone from a gender equity strategy that one could argue was perhaps a bit on the side to a core gender equality financed strategy right in the center of our work. And I think it's safe to say that everybody around the partnership is very focused on this topic. And we look forward to working with all of you to keep it there, and in particular to use this effort to really dig down into some of the things that everybody is very worried about, which is the impact that the pandemic is going to have on girls' education. So look forward to working with all of you on that. We've got an enormous agenda ahead of us, but everybody is squarely focused on gender and girls' education right now. So thank you so much for the chance to talk about it.
Thank you, Alice. That is really terrific to hear how squarely in the center gender equality is. That's great. And AV, would you like to add some comments on your plans as well?
Yeah, thank you. I think we all need to see this particular crisis as a huge opportunity to reimagine education and education that genuinely promotes social justice, gender justice, racial justice, environmental justice. I mean, we have a moment of opportunity, particularly as new curricular content is being developed for distance learning. I don't think there's any Ministry of Education around the world that isn't thinking about the provision of education in a new way, and also in that context, the content of it. So that's the biggest opportunity that we have. We have an opportunity also, as we have begun to really appreciate frontline health workers, also to appreciate frontline teachers. Many parents have been doing home teaching with their kids, and I think many have begun to understand how valuable the teacher is. So really making sure that we continue valuing those professions in a very different way. Let me just focus a bit more on content. I mean, we need to use this opportunity to have really gender transformative education, meaning that all our educational materials need to be revised so that any biases are taken out of the materials. Any stigma, any preconceived ideas of what girls can be need to be removed, and girls need to see more women leaders in their textbooks so that they can aspire for the highest offices in country, as well as jobs with STEM subjects in technology, etc., so they can take advantage of new technology. At the other end of that, the digital learning, etc., we've also got to make sure that we leave no one behind, and that we don't get so caught up with the latest technology, but that we find and support low-tech solutions that have also been used during this pandemic to reach the most marginalized communities. So radio broadcasts, television, sending reading and writing materials home, etc., making that a mainstay to reach the most vulnerable in the world. So I think there's lots of inspiration to be gotten from this particular period of crisis to totally reimagine education in the future.
Terrific. Yes, I think that theme of reimagining is an inspirational one to focus on. And Keme and Padmini, it would be great to hear more from your perspective too about what do you see are plans and priorities to ensure at-risk girls can return safely to school? Are there lessons we can draw on from past crises, whether they be Ebola or conflict situations or just working in remote, challenging areas, that we can learn from and bring forward at this time in order to ensure that we are building back better and helping to reimagine education? Keme, do you want to comment first from your perspective in Nigeria?
Yes, thank you very much. Because, as we all know, sorry about my cold, Nigeria had problems with what we call insecurity. And based on that, the government decided that we need to make all our schools safe. And so they came up with a grant, which was to fund Safe School Initiative. And the Safe School Initiative was critical to ensuring that all our children, both girls and boys, learn in safe environment. And so there's a collaboration between the community. There's good community participation to ensure that the schools that are within their communities are safe. And so you have the youths, the younger ones, come together and work with the security personnel of the school to ensure that marauders and bandits do not invade the school. And then we came up with good perimeter fencing to ensure that all those schools are safe, so that people do not just jump in or get their cattle and everything into the schools. And then there was good lighting system that was put in place. And aside from that, the first thing we learned was that there was need to have good community participation in ensuring safety of schools in communities. And then we also came up with this cash transfer to say that if every mother is giving cash transfer and the children have money, because before they send the children to hawk. And so when these women are giving money, the children will not go out to hawk, which also ensures their safety. And then we open up, there were during the COVID period, there were skill acquisition centers that were teaching these children. So the children had to learn a lot of skills without actually mixing with the populace like that. And they learned a lot of side skills, which now helped them in their schools when they resumed. And then we have this runner program. With runner program, every little child was taught to read, no matter how small. So it encouraged them sort of to go back to school, because anybody that can read has like an incentive with which to work in school. This skill acquisition, we taught both the mothers, we taught the girls themselves, and it was a good eye-opener for them. And with enthusiasm, they learned and went back to school. And then there's this distant learning, which children also cashed on for those who have fallen by the wayside, like second chance education for those who got during the COVID period, so that when they have the babies, they are taken care of by their parents and they go back to school. And then we also have this female teacher scholarship scheme, which encourages every girl that no matter what you have, no matter the hurdles, you can still learn and go back to school at any time. Then the government came up with this better education delivery, better education service delivery for all girls. And with that, they have prioritized schools, the functionality of school. 500,000 girls are supposed to be given scholarship to go to school. 300 children will be taught on skills in a safe environment. And all this we did to ensure that these girls go to school. And then there is a good mentoring system, which was put in place by the high-level women advocates and in collaboration with UNICEF. We work with UNICEF to train these mentors who are teachers themselves. Some are actually senior students whom the other children look up to. And when they see how they are going, they want to go back to school and remain in school. Those are some of the strategies
Thank you,
have
Kemi.
used to ensure that they remain in school.
Thank you. And Padmini, what are your thoughts on ensuring at-risk girls can return safely to school?
Thank you so much, Erin. First of all, I would again like to give out another shout out to the Ministry of, the government of UAE, Dubai Cares Rewired, because you've started this by partnerships, because global partnerships are key. And very briefly, to talk about, some of the lessons we learned after the Ebola crisis, when there was so much of devastation, disruption, is teachers played a key role, because they became educators, talked about hand washing, social distancing, and keeping oneself safe and using the resources available to get the maximum effort. And I very briefly wanted to talk about something which I think Bangladesh has currently been doing. The government of Bangladesh, they have a vision called Digital Bangladesh, and they have taken this great initiative of teaching students by broadcasting pre-recorded lessons through television. So, even though there is sometimes internet connectivity, we know that unless you have, you can still have your TV if you have power. So this is something they have done to get the ball rolling. And also there've been so many platforms which are being used. And there is also some countries have been working to promote the use of solar powered tablets. So that is another way. So you're using technology, innovations, And the other last thing I just want to say before handing it back to you is teachers are crucial in sending messages. We are all students and teachers, because as much as I have spoken, I have learned so much from this session, which I think is the same for all of us. And the other thing is, when you're teaching, make sure they're health messages. I'm not being biased in saying this because I'm a health professional, but I'm a first and foremost an educator. So I think in formal and informal communication is so important. So this is what we learn. We need to learn good practices and sharing information. And again, thank you to the organizers of this panel, even the GPE, for making this possible for us to share. Thank you. I think I've kept the time. Back to you, Erin.
Thank you, Padmini. And I think we've talked a lot about some important roles that government is playing. AB, it would be great to hear, just in our last few minutes here as well, the role of nonprofits and community-based organizations in promoting girls' education as well, because they're an important part of our ecosystem. And it would be important, I think, to hear about how they're part of the solution as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, there is no doubt that the primary provider of education has to be government, and that civil society, community-based organizations need to work hand in hand with government to ensure that they're delivering the most relevant education possible. What we can help with, and when I think we do it the best, all of us, is to supplement those government efforts. And for example, now, some of the things that have been happening is that we can help supplement with some of the essential services for the most vulnerable girls and boys, to ensure that all the barriers around going to school and education are removed, such as making sure that school meals are taking place even if the schools are closed, making sure that the cash transfers are there so that they can maybe replace school feeding, that girls have access to menstrual hygiene products, and that we've also been providing alternative delivery mechanisms for psychosocial support services. I mean, we know, as Padmini was saying, that so many children are affected by violence, by mental health issues right now because of COVID-19 as well. And civil society can help maybe fill some of those service gaps that are there. The other area that's really important now, that where civil society plays a huge role, is in the resumption of pre-primary classes alongside primary classes. I mean, governments will tend to focus on primary education now and getting that up and going, and secondary. But we also know that every year spent in pre-primary classes, we create better learners and students that are more receptive to the learning environment. And civil society can play a huge role there. And then I just want to sort of maybe finally, again, give a shout out to teachers. And I mean, community-based organizations, community leaders, involve teachers everywhere. They, as leaders in their communities, as those that nurture and develop children alongside parents. And I think we can all play a huge role in making sure that teachers are continuously valued, remunerated, well educated, well supported, to make sure that learning can happen in all sorts of ways. Thanks.
Wonderful, Avi. And I think we're all realizing through this that teachers are so critical, as many families are forced into that role of being a teacher. They understand what a hard and difficult role it is. So we want to wrap up our time together now, and it would be great to just end by hearing a few words from each of you on what you think one of the single best investments a country could make to build back better on this theme of reimagining education and putting gender equality at the heart of education. So it'd be great just to hear what each of you would really focus on. And Kemi, let's start with you. I think you're on mute, Kemi. You want to unmute yourself?
I'm sorry about that. Yeah. I just want to say thank you very much for this forum. I really appreciate it, despite my husky voice.
Thank you.
If there is one thing I think every government should do is to ensure that enough resources is committed to whole school education for girls.
Terrific. And Alice, what are your thoughts?
Very much in agreement. I'd say two things. I think the single best investment and smartest investment that a government can make is in education and is in girls' education. So I think that's very clear. The single best approach that we can take is to realize that schools are at the heart of service delivery in many ways, not just education, but education, health, protecting girls, nutrition through lunches. And so thinking about the challenge in a cross-sectoral way to help recover better. So education and using schools as a way to get out through to many different dimensions of the need for recovery.
Great. And AB, where would you recommend a government should focus?
In addition to what's been said, I would definitely encourage every single Ministry of Education to create formal mechanisms to consult with girls and young women about education, the needs, the barriers, be constantly engaged, not in a tokenistic way, but really bring the girls and recent graduates into the conversation so that every change we make in the future to education is based on the lived realities, because nobody knows what girls need better than girls themselves.
And Padmini, you have the difficult job of adding a new last thought. Over to you.
Thank you so much. In addition to what my esteemed colleagues have said, I think governments need to invest in building bathrooms for girls. And also, I mean, looking at the practical point of it, and also having teachers, especially women teachers, at the table when making policy decisions about education. So it's inclusion, in addition to what my colleague said, it's inclusion, but also practicality, looking at low cost benefits, low cost innovations, which make girls go back to school. Thank you.
Great. Well, Kemi, Alice, AB, and Padmini, thank you for the thought-provoking discussion today. I think we definitely heard that education is in crisis, and we know that and are seeing that, and especially it's challenging for girls. But I really appreciated how we stayed focused on ways to reimagine and build back, and ways that we can really focus on our commitment to gender equality, on the collaboration, the financing, all the pieces that it takes to really ensure that every girl has a future, and really every girl and boy has a equal opportunity to be able to have a quality education in their local communities. So thank you so much for the wonderful discussion. And our time has ended today, but I hope we've left all of the delegates that are listening with some inspirational message of how we can all work together to build back better from this crisis. Thank you all.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.